said also to the man who had invited him, "When you give a dinner or a banquet, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or rich neighbors, lest they also invite you in return and you be repaid. But when you give a feast, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed, because they cannot repay you. For you will be repaid at the resurrection of the just." When one of those who were reclined at table with him heard these things, he said to him, "Blessed is everyone who will eat bread in the kingdom of God." But he said to him, "A man once gave a great banquet and invited many. And at the time for the banquet, he sent his servant to say to those who had been invited, 'Come, for everything is now ready.' But they all alike began to make excuses. The first said to him, 'I've bought a field, and I must go and see it. Please have me excused.' And another said, 'I have bought 5 yoke of oxen, and I go to examine them. Please have me excused.' And another said, 'I've married a wife, and therefore I cannot come.' So the servant came and reported these things to his master. Then the master of the house became angry and said to his servant, 'Go out quickly to the streets and lanes of the city and bring in the poor and the crippled and the blind and the lame.' And the servant said, 'Sir, what you commanded has been done, and still there is room.' And the master said to the servant, 'Go out to the highways and hedges and compel people to come in, that my house may be filled. For I tell you, none of those men who were invited shall taste my banquet.'" A little bit of context would help with this story. If you go back to the very beginning of the chapter 14, verse 1, it says where they are when Jesus says this. And it's the Sabbath dinner, and they're at the house of, it says, a ruler of the Pharisees. I find this really interesting because it just shows how offensive Jesus' words probably were. They're at the ruler of a Pharisee's house having a dinner party. There was this practice in Jesus' time where they would have dinner parties, and it would be kind of like a social positioning exercise. It'd be kind of in some ways how we have Facebook and we show how many friends we have, or who we, maybe as a politician, who you have on the dais with you when you make a speech. It's who you would have seated around your table. It would be like a public event. And clearly, or probably, the chief Pharisee whose house he's at probably had people at the positions of honor around that table. And so for Jesus to say these words, he's probably looking around the room saying, what you're doing here is all wrong. And how offensive that must have been to the person who invited him. He probably never got invited back to that house.
It's helpful.
Yes.
Context.
What stood out to me about this passage were the original people that were invited as guests, and how they all make these excuses not to come to the banquet. You know, and it really shows that they really didn't honor the master of the house. They cared more about what their duties were, what they needed to attend to, instead of showing respect and showing up to the party. And so I think that, yeah, it's interesting that they made all these excuses and they said no.
Isn't that a little bit reminiscent of when Jesus said, I've not come to call the righteous but sinners? You know, it's like the people who, in this parable, the people who got invited but made excuses, they didn't realize how valuable it was to go to this party. The people in the highways and hedges, for them to get invited to a banquet would be a life-changing thing.
That's right.
But people who didn't appreciate the value of being at table with Jesus, like, oh, I have to do this other thing. So sometimes in our own lives, we place some of our own activities, our own interests, our own pursuits above the amazing preciousness of being in the presence of Jesus.
I couldn't agree more. It really convicts me. One of the things I love about this text is the idea of the persistence of the host. You know, he wants that room, you know, he wants the house full. He wants everyone to come and be part of this celebration and to have this moment with him. And for those who aren't showing up, it's like there are others who will appreciate this, who can. The invitation is great and it's extensive, and it includes us. That God's not going to let me miss out if my heart's open to listening to him and to follow him. He's going to get me where he needs me to be. But the guest list when I arrive may really surprise me. You know, it's going to be much more expansive. It's going to include all these people that I didn't think were going to be there.
What I loved about is in verse 22, He said, the servant says, okay, sir, what you commanded has been done, and still there is room. And then the master's saying, okay, now go out because I want my house to be filled. And I think just it shows a desire, the heart of the host. Like, I have this huge place, this table with all these seats ready for all the guests to come. And that really is the desire of God the Father, that there's space and room in his home. And he wants people to come and fill that place. And so in a way, we get to be those servants that extend that invitation to people around us, saying, come on, there's a party coming, and it's going to be a great party with Jesus, and you're invited to that party.
And it really ends with a warning, right? Because it says, these are pretty strong words. He says, I tell you, none of those men who were invited shall taste my banquet. What I hear Jesus saying there is, if anyone thinks they deserve the invitation, they deserve to be at the table, well, that's how you don't get to taste it, right? It's those people who are on those highways and hedges that go get reached out to, for whom an invitation to a banquet would be an amazing thing. That's where we need to be. Right? It's not saying I deserve to be at God's table. No, if I think I'm invited, if I think I should be there, I'm going to miss out. I'm not going to taste it. So the invitation is still there. What in me is desperate to be in the presence of Jesus? That's what gets me to his table.